don't exist. You're nothing but ideas.
He made millions laugh. His rubbery face, wild gestures, and untamed energy became the very definition of comedy in the 90-second. On screen, he was larger than life, but in reality, Jim Carrey was quietly disappearing. In interviews, he started saying things that didn't make sense. "I don't exist anymore. Jim Carrey is just a character." He showed up to red carpets with a vacant stare, speaking like a man detached from the world. To the public, it was quirky, but those close to him saw something else. A man in deep crisis. Then in 2015, tragedy struck. His girlfriend, Catriona White, was found dead from an apparent overdose. A note left behind pointed directly at him. What followed was a media circus, a wrongful death lawsuit, and a devastating silence from Carrey himself. How did the world's funniest man become one of its most broken? The truth behind Jim Carrey's genius is much darker. Jim Carrey wasn't born into fame or privilege. He was born into chaos. Raised in a struggling working-class family in Newmarket, Ontario, Jim was the youngest of 4 children. His father, Percy, was a talented saxophonist who gave up his dreams to support the family as an accountant. But when Percy lost his job, the entire family fell into freefall. They lost their home. They lived in a van for months, parking behind factories where Jim's father once worked. Showers became a luxury. Food, uncertain. School, a distant concern. At just 15, Jim worked as a janitor alongside his brother to help the family survive. The boy who would one day make millions laugh was scrubbing toilets to keep his family afloat. But even in darkness, Jim found a strange light: comedy. He began performing impressions in front of the mirror, mimicking teachers, celebrities, cartoon characters. He was obsessed with making people laugh. It was his way of distracting them from the pain, because if they were laughing, maybe they wouldn't notice how much he was hurting. Comedy became his armor, his mask. Behind it, though, was a boy carrying the weight of poverty, shame, and fear. And deep down, that boy never really went away. Jim Carrey didn't just become famous. He exploded. In the late 1982nd, after years of struggle doing stand-up in dingy clubs and taking odd television gigs, Jim got his first break with a role on In Living Color. The sketch comedy show became a cult hit, and Jim's elastic face, manic energy, and absurd impressions turned him into a standout. Hollywood took notice. Then came the year that changed everything. 1994. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber all released within the same year. 3 box office hits, 3 iconic characters. Overnight, Jim Carrey went from a quirky Canadian comic to the biggest comedy star on Earth. He became unstoppable. Batman Forever, Liar Liar, The Truman Show, Man on the Moon. The roles kept coming, and so did the millions. At one point, he was the first actor ever to be paid $20 million for a single film. But behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. Jim wasn't just performing, he was contorting himself to meet expectations, becoming the cartoon version of himself that the world demanded. And the higher he climbed, the lonelier he became. In The Truman Show, he played a man who slowly realizes his entire life is a lie. What the audience didn't know was that Jim felt the same way. At the height of his fame, Jim Carrey had everything the world said should make him happy: fame, fortune, fans, freedom. But inside, he was unraveling. He began experiencing intense waves of depression, not just sadness, but a hollow emptiness that seemed immune to success. "I had everything," he would later say, "and I was still miserable." No mansion, award, or adoration could fix what was breaking inside him. He withdrew from people. Friends noticed him becoming more distant, more philosophical, more lost. He would spend days alone, painting in silence, staring into space, questioning the nature of existence itself. He once said, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of, so they can see that it's not the answer." His identity began to dissolve. He started speaking of Jim Carrey in the third person, as if the man the world knew was just a character he had been playing. In interviews, he would smile blankly and say things like, "There is no me." Some laughed. Others felt uncomfortable. But for Jim, this wasn't a performance. It was a breakdown. And then came 2015. His girlfriend, Catriona White, a young makeup artist, died by overdose. The note she left behind was haunting. It accused Jim of emotional abandonment. Her family sued him, alleging he had introduced her to drugs and emotionally abused her. The case was eventually dismissed, but not before the damage was done. Jim vanished from the spotlight. No more movies, no more interviews, just silence. He once brought joy to millions, but now he couldn't even recognize himself. The man who once lit up the world with laughter was now a ghost, not dead, but gone. After Catriona White's death, Jim Carrey disappeared from public life. No new films, no red carpets, no late-night appearances. He retreated into isolation, living alone in the hills, surrounded by canvases and silence. When he did reappear, it was different. At a fashion event, a reporter asked him why he came. Jim responded, "I wanted to find the most meaningless thing I could come to, and here I am." He laughed, but his eyes were empty. Another time, in an interview, he declared, "There is no Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey was an idea. I used to be a guy who played characters, but I no longer believe in personalities." He wasn't joking. He was unraveling, or perhaps shedding. Friends said he spoke of seeing through the illusion of life. He read philosophy, meditated for hours, questioned whether anything, even himself, was real. The tragedy wasn't just the loss of Catriona, but the disappearance of the man Jim once was. The entertainer, the icon, the human being the world thought they knew. He stopped acting. He stopped chasing fame. And when people asked what he was now, Jim simply replied, "I'm just a wave, passing through, gone before we even understand it was ever there." Jim Carrey may have stepped away from the spotlight, but his shadow still lingers, not just in Hollywood, but in the hearts of those he once made laugh. To many, he was the wild, electric comedian who defied the laws of physical comedy. To others, he was the unexpected dramatic genius of the Truman Show and eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. But to those who looked closer, he was always searching for meaning, for peace, for something more real than applause. Today, he paints, he meditates, he speaks not as a celebrity, but as a man trying to dissolve the illusion of identity. He once said, "Depression is your avatar, telling you it's tired of being the character you've been trying to play." And maybe that's the legacy he leaves behind. Not just the laughs, but the honesty. Because Jim Carrey wasn't just a star, he was a soul in conflict, a man who gave the world everything, even when he was falling apart. Maybe we loved the clown, but we never truly understood the man behind the mask.